started.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. For those of you who I haven't met before, my name's Ira Yankwit. I'm the Executive Director of the Literacy Assistance Center, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to our panel discussions here this afternoon. As many of us have noted, this event is long overdue, and the Literacy Assistance Center is just really honored and privileged to be able to provide this forum for the discussions we're going to be having today. So I want us to move to our panelists as quickly as possible, but before I do, I just want to share with you our goals for our session today. So Will, if you could jump to the next slide. So we really have 4 goals for this afternoon. The first is to identify classroom, programmatic, and organizational policies, practices, and resources that create safe, welcoming, inclusive, representative, and affirming spaces for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, gender nonconforming, two-spirit, and non-binary staff and students. And let me just say, while it was important to us to name many of the ways that staff and students identify, we are also very aware that this is not a comprehensive list of the full range of gender and sexual identities that people have. Our second goal is to widen the range of lived experiences and histories that we fully recognize, represent, and teach about in adult literacy education classrooms. Our third goal is to connect adult literacy programs to broader movements for equity and justice, and we hope that this is a step in doing that. And our fourth goal is to begin to center and prioritize these issues within adult literacy education. As I mentioned earlier, this is a long overdue discussion for us to be having, but it is not a one-time discussion for us to be having. And one of the things that we're going to ask you about at the end of this session is what are some next steps that we can collectively take to continue this discussion and continue to center and prioritize these issues. With that, I want to turn it back to my colleague, Will Lin, who's going to take us through the agenda for the day.
All right. Thank you, Ira. So I am the ESOL specialist and the coordinator of ESOL certificate programs at the Literacy Assistance Center. Very happy to be having this event today, and I'm happy that all of you have come. So here's the plan. We'll start off with introductions, which we've been doing. Then our first presentation will be Call Me by My Name, Llamame por mi nombre, by Victoria Ortiz. We'll have some Q&A with Victoria. Then we'll move on to Understanding Heteronormativity in Language Teaching Materials with Ashley Moore. Providing a safe space for instruction with Jeff Lau. And then we have this 2-part thing here where first we'll have small group discussions and reflection and breakout rooms. And then we'll move to a whole panel Q&A where you can ask Ashley and Jeff whatever questions you have. The next step is the second group of panelists. We'll have Moving Beyond with Bino Realuyo. Hashtag IamABE, Evaluating Curriculum and Teaching Pronouns with Kris, Klas, and ESOL Lessons About Gender with Elke, Lerman. And then we'll follow the same procedure of small group discussions and reflection, and then whole panel Q&A. Let's see here. Okay, so here are some community agreements, some requests that we have. Of course, keep an open mind, please. There's no pressure to share things that you don't feel comfortable sharing. Please don't ask anyone to share personal experiences or information. As we are probably aware, conversations around gender and sexuality can be difficult for some people. Please be respectful of those around you and feel free to take care of your needs as they arise. In the breakout room and chat, about breakout rooms and chat discussions, in the main call, please keep your camera off and mic muted in order to preserve bandwidth. But in the breakout rooms, be ready to turn your camera on and discuss and engage and hopefully have very interesting, helpful, productive conversations. And thank you, Kris, Klas, for contributing these community agreements. I liked them a lot, and that's why we're using them. Okay. So let's see. I want to start. We'll start off with Victoria Ortiz. Victoria is an active member of Make the Road New York and an activist for LGBTQ rights. And she is also a former student. She has taken ESOL classes at Make the Road New York. So I'm very happy to welcome her here to be our first presenter. Liz Elena Iglesias, my colleague at LAC, will be interpreting for her. So there'll be some back and forth.
Victoria, ¿lista?
Sí.
Perfecto. So as Will mentioned, we're going to guide the conversation with Victoria. The guiding questions are, what would you like to tell the teachers and program directors about your experience as a student? So Victoria, ¿qué te gustaría contar a los profesores y a los directores de programa sobre tu experiencia como estudiante?
Hola, buenas tardes a todos. Mi pronombre es ella. Mi nombre es Victoria Galeana Ortiz. Soy una estudiante de inglés. Estudié en Make the Road. Ahora soy activista para la comunidad LGBTQ.
So my name is Victoria. My pronouns are she and her. I was an ESOL student at Make the Road New York, and now I'm an activist at Make the Road New York.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Will, y a todos los integrantes de este grupo que hicieron posible de hacer esto. Y también quiero alzar la voz de la comunidad LGBT porque siempre somos como que no nos identifican como mujeres trans o como gays, lesbianas o toda la comunidad. Siempre que nos llamen nuestro nombre o el pronombre que nosotras queremos, porque somos transgénero o somos de la comunidad LGBTQ.
So again, thank you to all the group to be here. I want to raise my voice and represent my community. And we're never heard. So I like to say that it's important for me for people to correctly use my pronouns. I identify she, her, my name is Victoria. And I want to start this conversation by saying that it's important for me to be called by my name and use the right pronouns that I have identified with.
Y para todos los integrantes como maestros o directores, en todo, bueno, es en general, en la comunidad en general, quiero que también nos reconozcan como personas trans o como personas de la comunidad LGBT, porque ahí donde pasa que siempre a mí, en mi persona, yo estoy una mujer transgénero, yo estoy en proceso hormonal, ya me cambié el nombre legalmente a este país y todavía me sigue llamando del señor no me quitan. Entonces, tener un poco más cuidado sobre cómo nos identificamos a las personas, porque tanto la comunidad en general nos atacan mucho.
So for all the teachers and director here, it is important to be identified as trans, as part of the LGBTQ plus community. We gotta be careful with how we identify that community. We're always attacked, and it is important to use the correct pronouns and the correct identification of the correct membership of the community.
Pero es por eso que yo estoy en ese espacio. Quiero que sepan que todos somos, pues, yo sé mi género que a mí me gusta y tampoco quiero, como mujer transgénero o como activista de Make the Road, quiero que se escuche mi voz para que tampoco no haya mucha discriminación a la comunidad, la comunidad LGBT, porque veo cada día que hay mucha discriminación.
That is why I'm here in this space. I want my voice to be heard, and I want to raise awareness and stop the discrimination against my community.
Y solo para terminar con todo esto, nada más y nada menos que quiero que tanto que nos respeten, a que tanto como nos vean, que nos llamen el pronombre o el nombre, está súper bien. A que no vengan a decirnos de él o de señor, porque estamos en proceso ya de hormonal, o viceversa, como los chicos trans ya están también y todavía le dicen de ella, entonces para mí no es correcto eso.
And just to wrap it up, I'm here to seeking respect and again use the use of our correct pronouns. Many of us are in the process, in the hormonal process with our transition, and it is important to be recognized the way we identify ourselves.
Y pues muchísimas gracias por escuchar mis palabras o todo lo que he dicho, y también por eso le doy gracias a cada uno de ustedes por su tiempo de estar en esta reunión. Y pues tenemos que ver las cosas más allá de la comunidad, porque somos más invisibles, pero estar así porque ya estamos en un país que hay libertad y tenemos lo que nosotros queremos ser, es lo que nosotras queremos. Respeto.
Thank you very much again for listening to me, and thank you for the time. We have to look past, we are invisible in sometimes in the society, but we have freedoms, and we want to be heard and we want to be respected.
Pues
¿Alguna
esto,
cosita más?
bueno, para mí es todo lo que quería decir, y que siempre nos tengan en cuenta como mujeres trans y en general, más que nada. Y muchísimas gracias por su atención y seguimos con la reunión.
So thank you very much for your attention. Again, emphasizing the importance of recognizing as part of the trans community, and please continue with the meeting. And again, I'm very thankful and grateful to be here today. Thanks. Okay, Victoria, gracias.
Gracias.
To note that none of the work we might do to make language and literacy education more inclusive for LGBTQ plus people will really mean anything if it doesn't ultimately center local, indigenous, two-spirit ways of being. I'd like to thank Will and I, organizers at the Literacy Assistance Center, for inviting me to share my work, which is a taxonomy of representational heteronormativity in English language teaching materials. And that was published in 2020 in ELT Journal. And I've also made a video explaining the taxonomy that's on YouTube. If you look in the chat, there's a link to a downloadable handout that has the taxonomy itself, links to that video if you want to share that with colleagues. So please do download the handout as well. So actually, I've been learning a lot recently from the work of Kris and Joshua Pays about how considerations of LGBTQ plus issues in language education have tended to be dominated by considerations of sexuality at the expense of non-normative gender experiences. So sadly, this failing has also included my own work. So learning from resources on trans representation, like the excellent documentary film Disclosure, I'm going to try to expand on my taxonomy and see if it can be a useful tool for you as we try to make language teaching materials inclusive of both sexuality and gender. I'm doing this work with humility as an aspiring ally for the trans community, and I'm happy to learn if I got anything wrong, okay? Sorry, I've got something in my eye. It's better, okay. Before I jump into the taxonomy, there's some big words in there, so let's unpack them. So taxonomy is just a list, right? It's a fancy word for a list. And let me explain exactly what I mean by normativity. Normativity is a kind of ideology that constructs a certain way of being in the world as somehow the only or the best way of being. So being heterosexual is the only way to experience sexuality, or cisgender is the best way and better than other kinds of gender. This is how normativity. In the case of heteronormativity, heterosexuality is positioned as the only natural form for human romantic and sexual relationships, or as the best form. This positioning is achieved by either denying the existence of non-heterosexual people or somehow suggesting that people like me are in some way wrong or less than. In the case of cisnormativity, cisgender people, so people whose gender identity matches the binary male or female gender they were assigned at birth, are positioned as natural or better. And the existence of trans people is either denied, pathologized, or somehow marginalized. As many of you know, one of the key ways that normative ideas exert their power on us is through representations in texts, including the various texts that we use for language and literacy teaching, like films, songs, images, and of course, textbooks. As researchers like Ben Goldstein, John Gray, Joshua Pays, and Jane Sunderland have pointed out, hetero and cisnormativity are very persistent stains, because even when the material developers have good intentions and try to include 2S LGBTQ plus voices, the ways they do so can actually still be hetero and cisnormative. For example, Ben Goldstein, on reflection, realized that some of the ways he had tried to include LGBTQ plus representations in the past had had the effect of framing those people as somehow controversial or taboo. You can see here that he had included same-sex relationships in a unit on taboo issues. So building on the work of the fine people I just mentioned, I've developed a taxonomy that I think can help us identify different kinds of normativity so that when we select or create learning materials, we can make better choices and reduce or even eliminate the chance that these materials might harm the students we teach. In my taxonomy, I suggest there are 5 different types of representative normativity, and we can place them on a continuum of damage, ranging from potentially more damaging to potentially less damaging. I describe the most damaging form of representational normativity as explicit discrimination. This is when the creators of the representation intentionally feature LGBTQ plus people in a negative light. Now, so far, luckily, I've found no examples of this in TESOL or ESOL specific materials, but we often use films in our teaching, and these 2 popular movies, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, are examples that feature clear and intentional homophobic and transphobic representations. You might also, a lot of teachers use Friends. That's full of homophobia, actually, and transphobia. So those are definitely more problematic than many people thought at the time, perhaps. The next type of normativity, normative erasure, is, I argue, potentially less damaging than explicit discrimination. Don't get me wrong, it's still awful. All the research we have so far suggests that hetero and cis normativity is achieved through English language teaching materials, publishers systematically erasing the existence of 2S LGBTQ plus people. And I'll give you this example. This is a book that I found recently in my university's bookstore, published by Dorian Kingsley, a huge publisher. You can imagine how excited I was at the sight of these rainbow design elements on the front cover and the promise of English for everyone. However, upon opening the book, I found the same old normative erasure, the same old two binary genders. They couldn't even give us a same-sex couple to illustrate the gender-neutral term partner. Marginalized inclusion refers to the representations like the one Goldstein shared, in which the intention seems to be positive, but the framing is such that LGBTQ plus lives are presented as marginal, controversial, or at risk in some way. So I have my own example, which is when I work with my co-authors to include a chapter on LGBTQ plus lives in the News English textbook we publish every year in Japan. So the framing of the article was analyzing because it was about a government program for LGBTQ plus citizens. And it was even marginalized within the structure of the book, tucked away at the end where few would get to it, and with a title that obscured the content. The publishers did that. Another example is this great book, which is called The Space Between, which tells the story of a high school martial artist dealing with the fact his ex-girlfriend is now a transgender man. Again, the intention is good, but the framing of this book within a series called Gravel Road that explicitly focuses on taboo or controversial topics makes this a marginalized form of inclusion. Less damaging, I would say, is mainstreamed inclusion, in which LGBTQ plus people and two-spirit people who happen to coincide with mainstream norms are included and celebrated. These mainstream norms might include things like discrete identity categories like lesbian or gay that keep categories such as straight fundamentally untroubled. Monogamy, marriage, procreation, and whiteness. Here's an example from the Path-Breaking Raise Up project, which has an explicit goal to represent a wider range of people usually excluded from language textbooks. In this family tree, which is, I can't stress this enough, revolutionary for ESOL materials, we see Teresa and her wife, Amanda, and their baby. Another example might be the film Transamerica, in which the sympathetic main character, played by cisgender actress Felicity Huffman, is a transgender woman. I want to point out here that there's nothing inherently wrong with 2S LGBTQ plus people coinciding with mainstream or established categories. But if that's the only way we can be included, then it becomes non-normative. Then it becomes normative. If bisexual, non-binary, queer, two-spirit, aromantic, and other people who trouble mainstream ways of doing sex, gender, and relationships are excluded, it's problematic. And if we are only included as long as we are good gays, neoliberal lesbians, and tame trans folk, it's still damaging. A better vision of inclusive representation might be what I call here critical inclusion. Critical inclusion wouldn't erase the lives of 2S LGBTQ plus people who happen to exist within the mainstream, but we would also see representations of genderqueer people whose gender identity might fluctuate. We would also learn about the diverse lives and community roles of Indigenous people who gather under the collective Two-Spirit term. We might see drag kings and queens working in bars, playing with, challenging the often rigid norms of gender expression. We'd also see 2S LGBTQ plus people included, even if they were unemployed or unrepentantly single, or in relationships that defied the constraints of Western monogamy. We'd see 2S LGBTQ plus people living their regular lives, struggling with work-life balance, enjoying their hobbies, worrying about climate change, doing good, making mistakes, being human. You might find this hard to imagine in ESOL materials because it's so far from where we are now. But we have a great model for this in the mock chapter designed by Tyson Seaburn that you can find through the link in the references I've shared. We might also think of TV shows like Schitt's Creek, which is very popular, and that definitely is that kind of critical inclusion that defies mainstream norms sometimes. So I hope this taxonomy, which you can download and share with others, might be useful to you and your colleagues to think about the type and level of hetero and cis normativity in the materials you use with your students today. You might even use it with your students to scaffold the development of their critical literacy skills and talk back to the text, critiquing oppressive normativities. I also hope that it can be a map that helps people select or create even better, even more inclusive texts for learning in the future. I know that not everybody participating today will be able to jump straight to critical inclusion, but any step taken towards less normative, less damaging representations is a positive step of progress. One final note before I pass the mic over to Jeff. The ultimate meaning that texts take on for us depends on how we interact with them, whether we celebrate them or skip them, critically discuss or dismiss them. Inclusive representation then is just the start, but it's an important first step that we in language and literacy education have a professional duty to take. Thank you very much for listening. Feel free to follow me on Twitter, where I tweet about these things quite often and about race and anti-racism in language education. And if any of this interests you, or you'd like to do a workshop perhaps with me and your colleagues, please feel free to email me. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I do love this content. I think it's so helpful. All right, so we're going to move on to Jeff Lau, and then we'll have some time for breakout rooms and Q&A. Jeffrey Lau is currently the director of the Adult Literacy Program at the Chinese American Planning Council. This program serves about 1,200 participants a year with English as a second language classes, citizenship test prep classes, and a language exchange program where English learners and English-speaking professionals practice conversational skills. Jeff is an active member with both CPC's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee and CPC's Advocacy Council, as well as with the New York City Coalition for Adult Literacy, with the goal of advancing the livelihoods of the community members he serves. Thank you, Jeff, so much for being here today and for speaking with everyone.
Hello, everybody. I just want to do a mic check. Can everybody hear me? All right. Well, I also have to apologize. I'm nursing. My voice isn't so great right now, so I will do my best. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today. Yes, my name is Jeff Lau. I'm the program director at CPC. I'm happy to see so many friendly faces here today in our adult literacy circle. And I was invited today to really talk about how we advance LGBTQ, really just promoting a safe space for instruction. How have I done it? How have we done it at CPC? And really just offer one viewpoint in a way. There could be many ways of doing this, but I just wanted to offer one way that we've been doing it here at CPC. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on multiple hats. I think we do that anyway when we're working in nonprofits and in these agencies. We have different hats depending on what the roles require. So right now I'm going to put on my old instructor hat. It's a bit dusty, so please forgive me. It's been a while since I have been teaching. I'm going to start sharing slides. I wish I had the scrolling, but I didn't know about that before today. Let's see, and share. All right, and can everybody see this? Yes, I actually can't see anybody's face now that I'm sharing.
Yes.
All right, awesome, thank you. All right, so really over the years, CPC has taken quite a few active stances in support of LGBTQ rights. And when I was an instructor, this presented unique opportunities to provide real world lessons about what was happening around. I was thinking about all the different issues that CPC had made statements with, but one that really particularly stood out was around 2018. I don't know how many of you folks remember this, how there was quite a bit of backlash against trans rights, particularly around bathroom usage. The former president was making these statements, and there were these policies that were starting to be presented that would have discriminated against trans folks. And so what our agency did was make public statements in support of the trans community. And at the time I was an instructor, and a lot of this, these statements were coming into the classrooms. And I thought this was just one example of the many examples that we had where we could bring some of these materials into the classroom in a way that was accessible, in a way that had real world impacts, and we can teach. So as an instructor, it was important for me to set it up. How I set it up in the classroom was I made sure that it was clear that this was going to be a space where we're going to talk about the issues. We're not going to discriminate. We're not going to say anything that could be hateful. And I set it up in a way that I thought students would understand it too. In that the reason why we're learning this was because this is just something that, like for example, this with pronouns. Sorry, I'm getting a little distracted with this. These were the pronouns that. Sorry, I'm going to step back. I was getting distracted with the people entering and leaving. Okay, so I set it up in the classroom with, we made a lesson around pronouns. And in this was one way to show why pronouns were important. We had a trans student in the classroom already, and we really wanted to just show how introducing yourself with your pronouns was a way of showing respect, of showing inclusion, and really wanted to teach the class why this was important. I set it up in a way for the class where when I introduced it as, you know, sometimes when you go into a meeting, I introduce myself in a meeting sometimes as, hi, my name, well, I introduce myself in meetings all the time really now. Hi, my name is Jeff Lau. My pronouns are he and him. We do this to be inclusive, and for some folks, it might not necessarily be clear to you, but it's also very important that it is made clear. You wouldn't want to misidentify somebody by the wrong pronouns because it is a sign of disrespect. So I explained it in a way, of course, when you tailor this to your classes, I would recommend that you explain it in a way that is, you would know your classes and their levels, so you would have to grade your language accordingly. Another thing that I also brought into the classroom is, as CPC was making these public statements, we also put up signs in around the facilities, signs that also supported the trans community, specifically with bathroom signage. Students were coming up to us and asking us about these bathroom signs. Students were coming up to us and asking us about these bathroom signs. What do they mean, right? What does it mean that we wanted to have all individuals have the right to use the bathroom facility that is consistent with their gender identity? This presented a really good opportunity for us to explain what these words meant in the classroom and just bring in real world realia into the classroom. So that's how I approached it as an instructor. There were other videos that I'm happy to share with you if you're interested, that also, they're publicly available on YouTube, where they really explained in very simple terms why gender pronouns are important and why we use them. So long story long, we decided that, I decided that I was going to incorporate it into the classroom this way. And I felt that it was very user-friendly. I've already been with the class for a very long time, so the students have already developed a trust with me. And they were comfortable enough where they can ask questions. It was important that students ask questions as well, because, I mean, sometimes it was important that they felt comfortable enough to ask those questions in the classroom. And it was also important for me to be able to answer those questions in a way that wouldn't necessarily make them feel bad for not knowing the answer right away, but at least give them the right answer and guide them along from not knowing to knowing. Just a quick run through of what a quick lesson could look like, or a quick activity could look like. It was just a 15-minute activity, maybe 20 minutes if needed. You could explain the reason why what are gender pronouns, explain what gender pronouns are, introduce it, explain to them how misgendering somebody can be disrespectful. You can also explain to them that this does occur in meetings and can occur in interviews as well. Just really bring in that real world aspect. I feel that when you do something like that, it adds a seriousness to the lesson. It also removes some, it could remove some of possible not taking it as seriously as they should. So by really giving these clear examples of why this is important, I think it really sets the tone when you're presenting this material forward. Review the grammar if needed. If this is a lower level class, you might need to review the subject and the be verb. You might need to review they are. That can confuse or trip up some students, and explain the reasons why, and then model it. Hi, my name is Jeff. My pronouns are he and him. So again, that was my instructor hat, and that's kind of how I approached it in the classroom. Again, this was important because we did have students, I had students that were trans in the classroom, and it was really important that the trans students felt respected. And I'm thinking of a particular student right now who it wasn't, some students weren't exactly clear. So by doing an activity like this, I was able to make it clear that he identified as he, him, and students really started to get it. And I don't think any students really trying to come at this from an angle of disrespect, really just trying to understand. Having these activities and these practices can really foster more open-mindedness and more, really, I'm losing my words right now. Maybe it's because I'm live. Just really foster more inclusivity and just wanting to understand more. So I'm going to move on now, and I'm going to put on my director's hat, my program director's hat. And as a director, it's been really important for me to foster this safe space for my staff. Taking for my staff, it's important that they know that that I got their back, right? And I wouldn't want them to do anything that they're uncomfortable with. Of course, I would want them to know that I'm also working on my side to make sure that they are valued as they are valued. How I've done that in our agency is, well, it helps to have the buy-in of your leadership. I spoke with our CEO. I speak with our CEO regularly. I speak with our chief officers regularly. And I often talk to them about these issues. Like our CEO will always say this word: it's important that we lead with our values. But it's really nice to have conversations with him to let him know, well, what are the issues that are happening on the ground? And it's great that he has an ear, and I'm able to communicate that with him. I'm able to communicate that with our chief officers as well within our agency. I feel that as a program director, you are uniquely in a position where you're getting all of this information from the students, from your staff, from your team. This is good information that should be passed along if you're not already doing that to your leadership, to let them know, specifically with LGBTQ issues, which is what we're talking about here today. Other ways you can also get involved is you can try to find groups within your agencies. One thing that I've done within my agency is I reached out to, we have a CPC Project Reach, which has been doing this work for almost 40 years now, where they work with LGBTQ youth in the community, and they're looking for, and they work with them with workshops, and also they work with non-LGBTQ youth as well to just try to promote more, I guess, inclusion, and they're working with them to just build more open-mindedness within this group of population, this group of people. Other ways you can get involved are the DEI committee. I'm part of a DEI committee, the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee, where you're able to voice these concerns, or you can just see if there are local LGBTQ plus groups. These groups might not necessarily be there. If not, there are ways you can really put one together. It's really not that difficult. They happen pretty organically. If you find that there are voices lacking within your agency, if you know of a few folks who are of the same group, you can, for us, it really just happened very organically. It was just, let's have a few lunches and then really just talk about our agency and what's working, what doesn't work. How can we as a group figure out a way to, I guess, like really just talk about some of the things that aren't working. Who are the right people within the agency that we can move this issue forward towards? And really, it just happened organically, where we built it from the bottom and just moved it upward. If there isn't an LGBTQ group within your agency, I'm more than happy to work with y'all and figure out how to make one. And also think about finding external supports and resources that you can share back to your leadership. Today is a great opportunity where we have this collection of agencies, and I'm seeing quite a few agencies in this group right now where we can share resources. I've seen LGBTQ resources come from a few of these organizations where I've shared back to my leadership to let them know, hey, there are some rallies. Maybe we should support this. Here's some reports. Like, just when the time comes, when the issue comes up, if you have these resources, it's really not too difficult to just pass it along to your leadership and show them how to get involved as well. Yeah, and finally, again, for your instructors, I do let my instructors know that please don't do anything that they're not uncomfortable with. I wouldn't want them to ever feel uncomfortable in the classroom. I do understand that we are working in a we're working with a public setting, and we might be working with folks who might not necessarily understand yet. So please approach this with how comfortable you are with this. I wouldn't want you to out yourself in front of a classroom if that's not what you want to do. And if you do feel that way, always know that I have your back. Right? I want my teachers to know that I support them in every way. But I also want to let my students, my teachers know that remember the lessons are moving for folks from not understanding to understanding, and just reminding them that it is a journey. Students do make mistakes, and we're there to guide them from, like, if they don't fully understand in the beginning, we're really just there to move them forward towards getting it. I believe that's my side of how I've approached this at CPC. And through the instructor's lens, I've really just used real world situations as a tangible way of talking about these sometimes very difficult issues. And as an agency, I've really leaned on my leadership, and I've leaned on the staff, my colleagues, and I've leveraged my position within my organization and leveraged my position as a supervisor in a very important program to advance LGBTQ plus issues. So that's it from me, and I'm happy to answer questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Jeff. I really appreciate it. Okay, so in just a second, we're going to go to breakout rooms, which will give you a chance to discuss these things in small groups, to reflect in small groups. And then we'll come back and have a Q&A for Jeff and Ashley. Victoria has had to leave due to her work schedule. So let me just get my, oh, and one thing I certainly don't want to forget to mention, we are recording the presentations, most of them, not all of them, but we are not going to record the Q&A, just so everyone can feel comfortable to express themselves as they would like to. You can see the link is, I'm sorry, not link, the reflection questions are in the chat.
Yeah. I'm gonna also try to get that chat window open and out of the way. Okay, here we go. So thank you for the introduction, William. My name is Klas, pronouns they, them, and I wanted to share some pictures with you all that sort of represent some of the work that I'm doing here in Minnesota. And I almost didn't include some of these because many of them are from 2020 when things still happened in person with other humans. And then the increasing relevance of them, I decided to go ahead and share them anyways. The first one is a picture of myself with a Hub Center student leading up to our teacher strike in 2020. And we are actually in contract negotiations, and our strike vote is next week to see if we're going to be back on the picket line again soon. And I bring that picture just to illustrate some of the things that I'm going to talk about today around student learning conditions are also teacher working conditions. And that's something that we have talked a lot about both in our 2020 strike and the one coming up. And I think that's also something important for us to be thinking about when we discuss topics like queer inclusion in adult basic education, because we want to be making sure that our programs are welcoming and safe and making space for everyone in the program to bring their whole self into the classroom, students and staff. I also have a picture of the Hub Center where I currently teach. There in the center, and I was thinking about which picture of the Hub Center I wanted to show you. And this is a picture from 2020, shortly after the beginning of the Minneapolis uprising. Our building had pretty minimal damage. I think just a few broken windows, but a team of teachers came together and we put some spray paint. It was the first time for most of us doing any type of graffiti, but with an attempt to make the building less exclusionary. You know, boarded up windows feel like we're not letting people in, we're not welcoming people in, and instead putting really supportive and inclusive messages on the outside of the building instead. And then the final picture is myself with Representative Moran, who is my Minnesota state rep. And I am in her office speaking on behalf of ABE and our needs as a part of IamABE. And IamABE is a ABE advocacy organization that some colleagues and I started with the intention of amplifying student voices. I was really encouraged to hear Victoria use that same phrase. I'm here to amplify my voice and my community's voice. And so our goal is to really kind of break down the binary of student and teacher in adult basic ed and say, you know, we are all adult learners together. Our students' needs in the classroom are also teachers' needs and vice versa. And we want to just like advocate together for our needs. And then finally, I am non-binary, and you know, that is my gender identity, but it's also, as I'm even talking about breaking down binaries in our programs in our classrooms, it's also a lens that I see the world through. So something that I want to do just for a moment, and this is why I have that chat window open, is give everybody a minute to maybe reflect on what you've been hearing other panelists talk about, your own experience, things that you are doing in your program, and just type in the chat a sentence or two about what it means to you to create a welcoming space in education. This is a way when I present on these topics that I often start out, and my colleagues and I start out just to get a level playing field, a shared starting space. So you can think about that and start adding that to the chat. And I'll probably read a few, but please continue adding them as we go. You don't have to stop at when I move on. Okay. Thank you, Ashley, for being the first one to put your comments in there. That always feels like a big jump, I think, in a big workshop. Nobody wants to be the first person. So definitely, I think there's a self-reflection piece involved in there, as Ashley said. That's great. Mary, language about inclusion in the orientation, yeah, and the public statements of support as well, right? Victoria talked about choosing very carefully where she feels safe going into places, and those public statements can sometimes be essential to getting your foot in the door. Okay, yeah, those, again, physical messaging in the building and the classroom, Christopher, thank you. Yeah, Bino, I think that connects so much to what you were saying about safe, brave spaces, making it feel safe to share all of who you are. being trauma informed. Okay, there's so many great comments, but I don't want to take up too much time. So please keep reading what other folks are writing in the chat as we go, and hopefully some of these things will kind of come up. So something that my colleagues and I here in Minnesota have been working on is this tool, which is really just 2 essential questions that we keep coming back to when we are trying to queer our curriculum, queer our instruction, queer our ABE program spaces. And that is, what is being included and what is being left out? And we break that down in lots of different ways, right? Thinking about the topics of our lessons, the things that we bring up in class. What grammar are we working on? What vocabulary are we teaching? And I think a lot of what Ashley illustrated earlier with the taxonomy of heteronormativity, there's a lot of connection and overlap. This is maybe like the starting point. And as you dig deeper, maybe you're getting into Ashley's taxonomy. And then what's being represented in the materials and pictures. And I think what we really want to be doing is constantly asking, okay, what's being included in these lessons and pictures and our materials? Because we want to make sure that what's being included is not erasing identities, or a couple of panelists have talked about microaggressions and things like that. But then we also want to be thinking about what's being left out. How are we marginalizing identities that our students are bringing into the classroom by not including them and leaving them out? And we also think about this, not just the materials and pictures of our instruction and our curriculum, but also the types of forms and advertisements that our programs use and things like that as well. Which also Bino used that intake form. And I think that's a really great example of having options or alternatives. I like how Bino brought up thinking about it thoughtfully, that if we're asking students to answer questions that they don't fully understand, that's something we need to think about as well. So then, as we have carefully reflected on what is being included, what's being left out because it's not included, asking ourselves then, what's the next step? So what do we need to change to make this more inclusive, to make it more welcoming to students? And then what would you then take out as well? What things are not being helpful? What things might be creating a space that's not as welcoming? And how can we adapt what we're using? So something that has come up in many, many conversations with teachers about this, and it has already been touched on this morning, is the idea of pronouns and how can we teach this and bring the classroom with our English language learners in a way that is non-threatening to students. And where do we find these materials? Because as Ashley mentioned, many of the things that are published and readily available, or even things that we draw on from pop culture to bring into our classrooms, are not designed with this in mind. And so my colleague, Dr. Jamie Crowell, and I put together this ESL pronoun lesson, and we specifically wrote it for what's sometimes called pre-beginning ESL, or beginning English language learners and beginning literacy, because I think, first of all students deserve access to this information and instruction, but also if we can do this at the very beginning levels in a constructive way, it's much easier to ramp it up and make it accessible at higher levels as well. So this ESL pronoun lesson is available, and I think William might have the link. Yeah, okay. So that you can all access it. It's free to download. We put it together, and you can just see some of the objectives and activities here. On the left is this subject pronoun worksheet. And I think, was it Jeff talked about using like the be verbs, right? That's like very beginning English language instruction, practice with those be verbs, and the subject pronouns. And so in our table here, we have representation of they as a singular as well as plural. And this is something that I talk to my learners about on a regular basis. And they are comfortable and understand a lot of the times that you can be both singular and plural. And so I connect it to that idea with them. And I know a few people have mentioned having students who are uncomfortable with this or immediately push back. But honestly, most of my students automatically are like, yeah, we hear people use it that way. So it's not some new concept that they have to wrap their minds around. So much as just like, oh yeah, teacher, we know. And then there's also a story that goes with it. And you can see, it might be a little small on your screen, but it's that sort of like beginning of the year, here's how we introduce ourselves, we're getting to know our classmates, and they are introducing different classmates, some of whom use he, some of whom use she, and some of whom use they. I also wanted to share a couple of resources with you all that we have found really helpful in developing our program, our curriculum and materials that I'm illustrating here, as well as you and your classroom and your program start thinking about this. The first one is this safe zone training. Some programs, you know, we talked about, a couple people mentioned in the chat that, you know, having signage and things like that in the building that show that you're supportive or you're an ally, that this is a safe space. That's a great way to send that message to students, but some places will require, at least in Minnesota, some schools require that you have some sort of training or certification before you can do that. And so the safe zone training is a pay scale, pay what you can training online. And so that's something that you can access and get that training and certification so that you can post that in your room. And then the other is the gender spectrum stock photo library. And this is actually something that was developed for the media, like news articles and news outlets and things like that. We started sharing this resource. I have seen news outlets using them too, but these are freely available stock photos of gender diverse individuals. And they're in various settings that connect very directly with a lot of the topics we talk about in our classrooms: healthcare, education, work, all the types of things that you might need materials, need to adapt materials for your classroom with. Something that I really appreciated about it is that they tell you the pronouns of the models in the photos so that you can accurately gender them when you use it for materials. I see that there are questions in the chat and hands up already. So before I sort of wrap up, I did want to give a shout out and a thank you to my colleagues, Erin Carey and Dr. Jamie Crow Journey, who helped me develop the lesson plan and put together a lot of the materials that are being represented in this brief version of our presentation, because I did not do all of this work myself. They did a lot to help contribute as well.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Kris. Again, big hand. If it were in real life, it would be a deafening applause. Let's see. We will have time for Q&A in just a moment. But for now, I want to introduce Elke Lerman. Elke Lerman has been teaching ESOL for 15 years in community-based organizations. The last 8+ at Make the Road New York. While at Make the Road New York, she has developed lessons that speak to learners' lives, incorporating topics such as LGBTQ+ issues, housing justice, workers' rights, and civil rights, etc. So thank you very much, Elke, for being here with us today.
Thank you. Okay, so hi, everyone. My presentation is about just as a teacher, teaching, how do you put this in? How do you fit this into your themes? So let me get my presentation here. Give me a second. There we go. Okay, so yeah, so what do you do, right? Why isn't this there? Sorry, getting used to this. Okay, so yeah, so where do you put it into a thematic curriculum? So, for a low level, family is a good place to start. Different kinds of families. And for if you're doing a unit on community, who lives in your neighborhood? What organizations are in your neighborhood? Your neighborhood. Justice movements, included in justice movement, talking about the Stonewall uprising, the gay men's health crisis. Gay marriage was, relatively recent, or still is in some places, right? And then also connecting it to civil rights. What are civil rights? Who gets civil rights? What movements are included in civil rights? So those are the places where I found to bring in these issues. So my experience, I found it very hard to find appropriate material, and I have a long list now that I will share with you guys. And learner reactions. So we've talked about this some already. I have to give the context of Make the Road. Our mission statement is that Make the Road New York builds the power of immigrant and working class communities to achieve dignity and justice. So given that that's already, our starting point, my experience is that the range has been, except for one time, the range has been from tolerance to acceptance. So a lot of people kind of shrug their shoulders and say, as long as you're not hurting anybody else, or, live and let live, that kind of thing, to, advocacy. As, Victoria was my student years ago. I have had trans students and I've had, allies in my classes. So, but that is the context of my organization, and, there might be more pushback from others. Okay, so lessons. So for family, for a low level or to start any lesson, there's lots of pictures, many kinds of families. Some of the other presenters have shown some of them, Google it, it's easy. I just Googled it the other day and included a few pictures for examples. So discrimination, this is an actual lesson plan that I have made about discrimination, and, that connection between movements and especially between discrimination of people of color and immigrants, and moving that out, right? And then I found this one lesson. Google refuses to move gay music from video, and it's in Breaking News English, and there's 4 levels of it. So that one's, you know, all ready for you to go. It's got all sorts of bells and whistles. So here are some examples that I found just, you know, just looking through Google. Okay. So this, you know, this one's like super wholesome, right? So then you get into, well, are you going to show people kissing? Oh, here, there's one more. Here we go. Show people kissing, right? A wedding with 2 brides, men kissing. What are you going to, you know, what are you going to include? How far are you going to go with your inclusion, with your images? Again, there's there's an adaptation. So you don't want to just hit your students with everything all at once. And like, especially if they're coming from very conservative backgrounds, you could actually have, you know, have a reaction. So you want to gently include, I mean, in my opinion, gently including, starting with just those really wholesome pictures and moving into more diversity, more, you know, obviousness, whatever. Okay. So I have a list of resources here. So this link here, and this will get sent to you, has my personal, in my Gmail folder, or my Google Drive rather, folder, all sorts of stuff, which is somewhat organized, but not extremely. And then I also have this one document that has these different things. And let's see, I should be able to get it from here. Unfortunately, I don't know what you're seeing now. So are you guys seeing a list?
You're all good. You're all good. It's the list.
Articles and periodicals.
Okay. So this is a list that I've made, that I tried to clean it all up for this for this presentation, because it's stuff I've made over time, found over time. So yeah, so I have these articles. So some of these are definitely going to be more ABE or even HSE stuff. You know, it really depends on your level of your classes. That's why I said, oh, ESOL. And the other thing I said ESOL plus, because I was an ESOL teacher, but I know that this presentation is for all adult learner teachers. So, you know, there's some very interesting ones. This Black and Brown trans people is pretty recent, and it's about a housing development or project in, I think it was in Queens. And it's in process now. They've started to open it up. So that was really exciting thing to find. And so, yeah, so I have a bunch of stuff here. Yes Magazine I love. And Change Agent, and probably most of you are familiar with that, because that is about for adult learners specifically. Yes is just kind of a general upbeat kind of combo new age leftist sort of magazine. I love it, like I said. Communities Magazine is very specific, very small circulation. It's oriented towards intentional communities, but they talk about different issues. And so they had an issue on sexual politics. They had an issue on gender issues that has interesting stuff in it. So articles and other communities magazine issues. Here's an index I got. And this, I can't remember where this is from anymore. 2 men kissing in front of my kid. Awesome. I think it might have been from some blog post, but anyhow, I just really enjoyed that. All right. So then this one is a lesson plan that I made specifically. That's the one that I mentioned before, where it comes from talking about discrimination. Okay. Here's a bunch of videos, different videos that you can use. Again, a lot of them are a little bit high for, you know, the lower intermediate classes, but some of them work. You know, you can just heavily scaffold. Okay. So conversation questions, gay rights questions that are pair work. questions for straight people. This is something that a colleague of mine made, and it's turning the tables. The kind of questions that LGBT people get, like, when did you know you were heterosexual? And, you know, is heterosexuality normal? Those kind of, it's kind of funny. When I tried it on my students, it just didn't communicate. So it would need some heavy scaffolding, or maybe, you know, more appropriate for HSE. Okay. And then here's some more just questions that, that I found or wrote. I don't even remember now. Here's I have an LGBTQ vocabulary Quizlet. So that's online. And then this next few pages, something I put together back in 2012, and I didn't have time to go and check every single link here. So there's a whole bunch of stuff, and it might be helpful, hopefully, right? Like I said, there's a lot. So there's a lot here. And that's really, you know, most of what I have to, well, let me go back to my, that's pretty much all I've got. So I don't even think that was a whole 10 minutes, but we're catching up on some of the time we lost. So thank you. And let me stop sharing my screen again. And that's all I got to say.
Thank you so much, Elke. Thank you very much. And there was no time lost. It was all spent valuably, just exploring some topics in depth.
Didn't mean it negatively.
No, certainly not. All right. Well, I think that you know, we had planned to have breakout rooms, but we have 20 minutes left, and you know, 10 minutes for breakout rooms, 10 minutes for Q&A. Might feel a little bit short for the whole group Q&A. So I think we can just go to that. We can just go to the whole panel Q&A. So if let's see. Oh, I see everyone is getting spotlighted, and I will now stop the recording.